Hey everybody, so Honest Sarcastic here. So I guess I don't know how to explain it. There's like a kind of just a lot going on in general in the whole theory with like value and whatnot, and it just seems like I feel like maybe I've never explained it well enough, or it just kind of got lost over the course of time. Um, so in general, most of you guys are quite familiar with me talking about value a ton and like playing a bunch of dice, but maybe it and like the way I would say this is the deck building kind of also like just frequently seems flawed, right? Like how often do we see someone nowadays actually still playing droids and doing favorably well, right? It seems like the deck building portion of droids tends to be lost on people. And this isn't some like dick measuring thing where I'm just like, yeah, I'm great. No, no, like none of that matters. The big thing here is like I want you guys to be able to kind of evaluate the stuff, and because realistically you've probably seen infinite amounts of me playing droids, I kind of want to break down, how you'd kind of like monitor and pay attention to the sequencing and like see this from like a deck building standpoint instead of having to put potentially tons of hours in to realize like where a deck needs to be and where it has to go. So I had a little notepad thing here. I probably need to make this font much bigger than it is though, so you guys could actually read what the hell it's saying. Yeah, that's close enough. Okay, so now let me just give a quick breakdown. So let's say you have this. This is your lineup. Now, if we look at the characters, it's like okay, one indirect side, no damage sides, and then has the two. And so from the front, right, without playing any dice, we would max out at roughly two indirect, and then a two melee, and then potentially a pump it with a three PO, which is shit damage. It's terrible. Um, so you pretty much know from the absolute beginning you're going to need to play a bunch of dice cards in order to kind of make value from it. And then any of you guys that are like kind of familiar with the old days with the old school drive by, it's like okay, the base concept was similar. It was make a bunch of money and put a bunch of stuff in play, but it was a little more than that. It was that for you wanted to get some cheap stuff that you could get twos out of. Um, so we don't need any of the removal here because that's all largely irrelevant. So I probably should have flipped this deck upside down, but it's easier to just go through this, right? So now here's the thing. If let's say you play two Fickles, right, for your two resources, because the die is a little wonky, it's like, okay, if you're not focusing it, what can you actually expect? So like from a math standpoint, you'd say 50% of the time we're looking at one, two, or three damage. So if we total those up to six damage, we would say 50% of the time we're probably expecting an average of two. The dilemma here is that the three for one resource changes the math a little bit, but base concept is like you're probably looking at two damage from 50% of the damage sides. Like from one third you're looking at like two and a half. So like there's different ways to kind of play with the math, but the base expectation is that if you're resolving it every round for damage, you're getting one, two, or three. Um, Keep in mind we are ignoring the loss of value of paying the resource just for the discussion of damage here. So like it's not exactly I'm expecting to get this because it's there's like weird shit and blah 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 and like more or less I'm trying not to mess you up too much, so don't take this as pure as gospel. I'm just trying to explain damage here. So if we get two of these, realistically we could fathomly assume that if we can obviously not use our focuses on it, but just resolve two of the damage sides, we're probably expecting an average of four damage here, like a one and a three, a two and a two, and so forth. Um, because like there's gonna be times where you hit the sixes, there's gonna be times where you get five, there's gonna be times where you get two or three. So, but like average, you're looking at four damage there. And now that starts to kind of change things, right? Because originally we only had this regular two. So the cheapness of Fickle with the two resources we started with is like, okay, that makes sense. We can do a bunch of stuff. The base kind of theory with droids has always been, okay, I'm going to ramp up So I'm actually going to have 4 resources. He's going to be tapped. One of these 4 dice is going to be gone. Because the theory here was like, Satine Elite with 3PO Elite, or even just Grease. So you have 4. So it's like, oh, okay, what can I get from it, right? The problem is that very frequently we're looking at the other stuff, the other cards. Like, what do you actually get from a hired muscle? Let's say you play a hired muscle, and then you have to pay for the resolve. If you're resolving one of the 3 damage sides, it totals 8. You divide by 3. We're going to be looking at 2.66 average damage, but it costs us 2 resources, right? Fickle, because of the 3-for-1 and the resolve on that, and like not counting it, we were essentially saying we were getting an average of 4, but um, it's probably an average of 4 using 2 resources. So including the cost itself, we be saying we probably get an average of 4 damage using about 3 resources. It's probably like 2.5 or 2 3/4 or something silly like that. But I think it's better just to say 3, because doing 3-for-1 and a 1 is going to cost you that additional resource. The only time we get 4 damage without paying this extra resource is both 2s. But we can hit 3 damage without spending it, which is probably better than 4 with spending it. But sorry, I'm not trying to like get you lost in this. I'm just trying to more or less explain. So the thing here is you got to remember, right? So this first round, if we 3PO money, we have 4 resources. Well, if we're playing, let's say, 2 Fickles and only getting, 4 damage and spending 3 resources, we only have 1 resource left. And now if we play that for removal, we're broke again. And you kind of need to get additional resources to get additional stuff out. So kind of the like the permanent intent was to always just play stuff like Entourage. Okay, so I have 4, I pay 3 for the Entourage. Boom. We get 2 more money. We're back to 3. We play a second Entourage. We get 2 more money. We play a Fickle, and now we try to get like 2 damage or 3 damage. So now what happens is, we are still broke, but we have these 3 dice in play. So going into a subsequent round, it's like, okay, now you're expecting much different numbers. You're looking, okay, let's say we have 3 scoundrels. From the damage on this, you're looking at 2, 3, and 3. So it's like, okay, that's 2.66, no additional costs. Same thing with the Entourage again. And then the Fickle still going to try to get you an average of 2. So now we're looking like, okay, 2.66 plus 2.66 plus 2, we're looking like at 8, 8 1/3 damage there. And we still have, in theory, provided no one died, our initial dice. So we can play more and more upgrades. So the issue comes along with this, right? Now, let's say you didn't play Entourage. Entourage didn't exist here. And you spent your 4 resources, and, you played a Fickle and a hired muscle, and you dealt 6 damage, right? You dealt a 3 and another 3. You focused. Bam, you smashed your opponent in the head. You don't have a lot going on. Going into the next round, you need to spend another resource on the hired muscle and another resource on Fickle if you're doing 3-3 again. That means you're back to 0. So if 3PO gets you 2 money, your board state doesn't advance much, but your damage, you put out reasonable damage. So that's kind of where that big thing goes in, is that like in the old version, we were looking for, resistance crate speeder. We're looking for Entourage. We're trying to get, 4, 5, 6 money. We're playing like a Millennium Falcon. And what it was there is that, you know how I always talk about like a card paying for itself? When a card can pay for itself resource-wise as opposed to damage-wise, you can just play additional cards. So if you can chain through cards that pay for themselves, they're, quote unquote free, right? So now what happens is for each round that the game's still going, you're getting essentially that much damage for free. So like when an Entourage, you pay for 3 and then you get the 2 resources back, essentially it's saying that the Entourage had like cost you 1 and came into play tapped. And like that in general is quite ridiculous when you look at the side. So let's say this game, you play Entourage round 1 and you go, I don't know, 3 or 4 rounds, because it tends to be hard for people to do 24 damage in 2 rounds, but they could do it in 3, usually 4. You're getting so much value over time from it that it's ridiculous. But let's compare it to something else tiny, right? None of these are tiny. None of them have fucking resource sides. Awesome. So let's compare it to Ewok Bow, right? So if Ewok Bow comes out round 1 and you get a single resource off of it, it's paid for itself. But the problem is that over time, the value it's getting for you is very minimal. It's going to get you like 1 damage per round, or a resource, or a disrupt per round, or a shield. So 3 rounds later, it's gotten somewhere between 3 damage and 3 resources, which is very low. 3 rounds later of Entourage, we're talking it could have gotten you 6 resources, 9 damage, 6 disrupt. That's a very drastic difference. So normally what you're trying to do is play something very large with droids that can pay for itself resource wise. If it pays for itself resource wise, what's happening is that it's kind of replicating essentially. So you're like boom entourage, boom entourage. You could play like Padme ship and like whatever other thing, and you're getting so much value from it because it's so close. It's paying itself off so fast that in the subsequent rounds, because each of the die sides are so large, it is just kind of ridiculous. So which one is Padme ship from? Padme ship should be from convergence block. So like, let's look at Padme's. So now, realistically, I should be running Padme's, but I usually choose not to because I'm usually short on damage dice. So like playing it and then failing is just brutal, but it's good defensively, and then like just fixing everything. So Padme ships, it's kind of similar esque in Entourage. The only problem is it doesn't have actual damage. It's good for everything else. So um, you have the 2 money side, and then the 3 focus and the 2 focus are actually the next big sides. Whereas like Entourage next big side is the two disrupt. Um, because the 2 indirect like the value of 1 damage, 3 indirects a resource and a half. Sorry, 2 indirects about 1 resource. 3 indirect is a resource and a half. In the special, if you can get it to 3, then 1.5. If it's 4, it's worth 2 resources. So Padme ship doesn't kind of get you that bigger value, but let's say you're playing Satine. Satine here makes sense to run Padme ship primarily because you're going to be able to get additional health via the Satine shield. Um, so sure, maybe your opponent's not going after Satine, but if they're doing any sort of indirect, that shield is largely valuable. And then because it adds on top of the die, like imagine this is 3 shield, 2 shield, 2 resource and a shield, 3 focus and a shield, two focus and a shield. Like that's quite ridiculous. Realistically, if they kill Satine, the shield thing's gone, so it's like that's crap. But just from a value perspective, it's really high. The only dilemma is that after this is finished kind of paying for itself, it needs to do a lot. Um, so what you would normally want to do here is have things with high value. Ewok bow is a little rough because it doesn't have a 2 side. If you kind of think of the old days where I played like drive-by, the concept of DH17 was is that if you had the additional focus available for it, you would just flip to +2s. And you would smash your opponent because you would pay 1 and kind of get 2 from it over and over. And Fickle does that same role, where if we can focus it, boom, 2 ranged, or 2 disrupt is just absolutely disgusting. So that's kind of where that big thing goes. So like Padme ship would make sense to run it because of that. Um, Anakin saber, right? It's just like, oh yeah, I got an Anakin saber down, but like realistically, you paid 3. If you put 2 damage into someone, you didn't do much of jack shit. From a defensive standpoint, because you're getting 2 shields and you really don't care about the 1 shield that you gave them, you could kind of view that as if you paid 1 of the 3 for Anakin Saber as removal. Now, if you're getting 2 melee, 2 shield, or a resource, you're like, okay, well, Anakin Saber's paid for itself 2/3 of the way. The dilemma is that if you were just better off taking hits to the face, then that resource you spent into getting more shields is largely irrelevant. Um, so the dilemma is like let's move these a little bit out the way and kind of explain this again. With Anakin shield or so the base concept of this version with Elite Grease is that we could just roll him out as the initial part, essentially like what you used to do with Satine. Um, call the 1 and immediately flip into double resources. There are not easy pickings right now, and the number of like ambush removal that they could then follow up with another removal is really low. So your opponent can't stop the 3PO ramp. So boom, okay, you ramp, you're now at 4. Now the dilemma here, or the concept is that because you're going to be at 4 now, you can play what You can play two drops. You can play a 1 and a 3 and one. So the problem is that let's say your deck is littered with Vibro Swords and Chewbacca's blasters, right? Those aren't going to get money back. So if you spend your money pushing damage here, that's it. You spend your 3, you do a Chewbacca's blaster, do you burn focus to try to hit them for threes? It's like, okay, that's great for damage, but you don't get like a bigger board state. So you do that, boom, you take a damage, you get your Chewbacca's die out, and like maybe it hits like a disrupt. If I can take a disrupt, take a resource here, I would actually just jam the disrupt in, unless you know that you have to push damage. So the dilemma is like then if you're wasting like a focus to get to a 3, and then you get 3, and then you go in, you get the 3, and like I don't know, maybe something shitty here. So you're at 6. It's like okay, we did good there. Realistically, like yes, from a damage perspective, you did good. If you're playing against a deck where you need to push the guy down, that's fine. That's great. The dilemma is when you're playing against a deck that you don't need to kill a guy right away. They're very slow to set up. You should be trying to set up a big board state. So the issue is that with a deck like this, if you kind of look at what we have right now, um, a bunch of the cards are actually just pushing damage. They don't set up a board state. None of these ones have resources, or Anakin has a resource. I lied, but it's not a 2 resource, so it's not going to pay for itself well. So you're realistically trying to push damage with it. BD1 doesn't have a resource side. I'll explain Ewok Bow in a bit, but yeah, none of these have resources. So what happens? You only have Entourage in the deck because Padme's not in there right now, and I'm considering it to reliably kind of do that stuff with. So then you're just like, well, what's going on? And it's just that you become a very brittle, like action cheaty damage deck, kind of like the old Han droids, where you like put stuff down, you flip to damage, you pushed it in, you knock a guy off the table, their damage falls off, like you're good to go. The problem is that if they successfully knocked your guy down before you knocked them down, and you lost an upgrade or anything, you were in a world of hurt. Um, if you did the entourage play, got a bunch of money, and they mitigated both of the ramp cards or the ramp, because like when we get to 4, we still have 3 dice left. Um, and there's pretty good odds to find 2 resources on the 3 dice. Plus, one of them should already be showing resource. So if they mitigated one, then it's like okay, I may not get to the hard casting 2 entourage, but they mitigated one, so I don't care. Whereas if they let you go to 4, and then the 5th one's already on resource, and you're 55% to find 1 on 3PO. So boom, you're at 6 entourage. The odds of you getting to the resource side, you have to use R2. That's fine, but to get it on both is low. So then, realistically, it's 30% for an entourage to show resource between the 2 of them rolling out. So like you're actually feasible odds between that and a reroll, including the 3PO, to actually have both show 2 resource. So it's like, okay, but if they mitigate both of those, you actually dealt no damage, and you just have 2 entourages down, and you probably have like a 4 or 5 card hand. So like that's problematic as well. The big thing here is because there's so many things that actually can't pay for themselves, what you're actually doing is you're using your character dice to get money, and then you're just using that money to push damage, which is perfectly fine. But you have to kind of just be aware that that's what the deck's doing. And so then you need to kind of adjust where if you need to make a board state because your guy's getting pushed down, or you need to replace your engine, how do you do it? Because let's say R2 dies round 1, or not round 1, but like top of round 2. And even if he has a redeploy, like what do you do? Because the dilemma is like, let's say you get the Anakin Saber. You can't start off going Grease, then 3PO, ramp more money, because if when R2 dies, this is just going to move over to someone that's already activated. If they're going for 3PO, like, you're fine, right? But like you still lose your focusing at that point. If you're down the focusing here, you have a shit focus here, and you have the Grease focus. So, where do you kind of go with that? And I think that's where Padme ship comes into play. The dilemma is that for me to go Padme ship, I probably decide to like cut these 2, and just have Chewbacca's plus 2 Vibros, and like I'd be okay with that. So there is the other version where it's Elite R2, Elite 3PO, and then 1 die Grease. And the concept here is that you have the cheaper Vibra Sword and Chewbacca's blaster, and you have 2 focus coming in off of the setup. The only dilemma for that is that sequencing wise, it's a bit of a fucking mess. So one second, let me go delete some stuff. Um, what I mean by that is, so let's say you R2, you flip to one money. The problem is the opponent can actually just mitigate you there. And you're just like, well, shit. Do you have to YOLO 3PO or do you have to grease to fix stuff? If you have to grease to fix stuff, you've burnt up all your focuses. So like it lends itself to worse sequencing. This is where Ewok Bow primarily comes in because you can pay one, go straight to Grease, and now Grease can do this shit, flip over, and then just show both money on the two things. Or if he wants, he can go like money. No, why is that the fifth side? Oh, there's the fourth side. Money plus disrupt, which is what we would do frequently with R2. Um, so that's why I'm pushing big on Ewok bows right now and potentially Yoda's lightsaber. Because the thing there over like the salvages is that, or the grapplings is that grappling doesn't have a resource side. So I don't have a chance of natural hitting it, and it can't go on grease. So I can push like this with an Ewok bow um, to to kind of do that, and then play out the entourages and stuff. Have not activated R2 yet, um, and then like see what happens with like grappling arms. The main dilemma here is that the more of these big things you're running, the harder it is to kind of sequence and do stuff. So setting up with the Ewok bow is actually going to be largely more viable, and this makes it so grappling arm is also better because you could still do that on R2 and you have the plus twos and you have the additional focus. The dilemma is just it's always sequencing. Sequencing is the big issue. You need a bunch of money. So I'm gonna re-scrap the deck and kind of like readjust. Because the thing is, if you have too many threes, you're just not doing enough. You want to just play multiple like ones or realistically twos in order to get that damage, and that's where kind of Crate came in. Was that Crate could pay the two, rampant stuff. So like you just had rounds where you were like entourage, okay, um, get the two money, play the second entourage, get the two money, play a Crate, get the two money or just get damage because you're out of focuses at that point. And like and play like the fickle, and you're just like, this is ridiculous. And like that's the big thing about it. When you're looking at a bunch of shit with like vibro swords and Chewbacca's, your damage can be considered quite high. But your overall everything is just a fucking mess. Um, so I think what I'm gonna try here is I may consider just trying like these like that for four. But I'm probably just gonna go like this and just have these three plus the two entourage again, and check out like the one cost options. I think the Ewok bow would help the Grease plan and make it so I'm not burning R2 as much. Um, the dilemma is just that like we have to hit the damage, and we're gonna most likely lose a guy, so we have to have a board state that's reasonable. So I think hired muscle also comes down to a one of, whereas I was running two for a while. I think the cost on it's actually just too high for what I'd be looking to do. I may consider just the Padme ship and have that sixth option. So like two entourages, Padme, Chewbacca's, and the two vibra swords. And the Padmes will. Oh no, Padme's not good for this. Padme's better for the Satine version because without the shield, I don't like it nearly as much. It's still perfectly fine if you feel that you need another like ramp engine or focus engine. Um, but I don't like it kind of as is. But yeah, we have to look for other cards that can kind of do that or like pay for themselves. I think Salvage Arm is probably the one that goes back, and then I could consider running an Anakin's because we would have so many like one drop upgrades. The other thing there is that the action cheat setup would completely screw up you trying to play upgrades very frequently, and that's another concern. Um, so we're kind of gonna like go from there, and like I know a lot of this was a mess, and I didn't use this fucking notepad whatsoever. Um, awesome, but the the base theory is that if you have a vibro sword, you want to play like the upgrade or whatever on R2, roll out, do whatever stuff, get to three to then vibro sword up Grease. The dilemma here is that the vibro sword is only three damage at that point, and they're not likely to go after Grease. So then, like, what value did you really get in comparison to something like Chewbacca's blaster that can come in twice? And that's really the hard part is like figuring out how to best do that. Chewbacca's blaster is the best thing for pushing damage. Um, of all of these cards because we can get the die twice and we have that much focus available. So like, um, it's hard to go and cut it, and that's why I had two right now. Because I wanted to test it a bit more and see like where I'm at with everything. But like, it's functionally very rough. Like realistically, if you go two Grease, this is probably a better setup with the Chewbacca's because you can do the money thing. You don't have an issue there. Start with the Ewok bow here. Now you have Disrupt available. Grab money with 3PO and then jam like Chewbacca's over here. Um, I guess realistically, like I don't need the other redeploy, but it's without how to explain this. We could just try to push it as a pure damage deck. It's just really hard because everything has to like the more threes you have, the more shit's a mess. So I'm right now I'm kind of testing to see how I feel about things. But hired muscle and like Fickle's great. Hired muscle is great when you need to activate all your guys. The problem is like action cheating off of this. When you do anything besides get a kill is tends to be pretty bad. Like when I action cheat to disrupt people, it's not great. The um the issue with that is usually that like because I did that, I kind of screw myself over. So like maybe it's at the point where I run, one hired muscle, two Fickles, and two entourages, or potentially just go two entourages and two Fickles or something. I think the hired muscle is still super useful. It's just where to go because the grappling arms are much more not cost efficient, but they damage wise because they have the plus twos and no pay side. When if people are stopping whatever other thing I'm doing, like I can push raw damage with that. But they don't work well with Ewok bow and Chewbacca's. And then like Yoda sabers also only ones, and like having a bunch of one damages is sucks when you need to get damage, especially if a guy dies. So like there's a bunch of shit to go with and figure out. But you could either try to play it essentially like it was old school Chopper, where you put your upgrades down, you bash in, you action cheat and get out of the round, or you could try to play it like the other one where you use like ramp in. I am looking back into Rescue Han to see if there's any adjustments that can be made there. You can't do Grease with Rescue Han because the number shit messes you up too much. Um, but there are options to kind of work with, and we can see where we end up. Like the Rescue Han version has one less 3PO die. So the concern there is that Satine comes out, finds a single resource, and again that gets mitigated, and you now have to like, all right, well, what are you gonna actually do? Um, and with like Bazine to hate out Rescue Han and Jin just being a potential pain in the ass, we probably would have to wait a little bit more for the meta to just not have those decks. Um, but I'm working on stuff right now and seeing where I can go. But even the fact that like I have all of these effects because we don't have like pure raw damage, like the deck still feels relatively like underwhelming at times. I do ridiculous shit with it because the overall value is insane, but that's only when people let you maintain that value. If people are pushing raw damage, you're gonna die. Like you don't like there's nothing else you can do there besides just kind of die because each of your guys has eight. So unless you have multiple redeploys and a freedom for sequencing, it's often a fucking mess. People are still killing 3PO too, which is kind of messing with me a fair bit. Like I kind of when I have elite R2 elite 3PO and they're killing 3PO, like I don't know I don't understand. Like so like adjusting from that also matters. The other thing is our removal has a lot of spots, like fluid riposte, electroshock, and then even our action cheat, the red one, it's dead if 3PO dies. So like we have instigate, that's great. But I don't know. I'm gonna try to adjust and see where I end up. Like hired muscle with vibro sword is very good because you could hired muscle roll out, and then if you instigate cheat grease, you can flip hired muscle to the 3 for 1 melee, and then you have the vibro sword that can flip to the 3 or the 4. So if grease is elite, it's like okay, this is actually very interesting. And then if with Ewok bows and Yoda saber is where we can try to set up like an Ewok bow on R2 with in this version to roll out and have two dice to like fix one of them to resource and then like see if an opponent messes with it or not, and then vibro sword onto Grease. Um, but we can kind of just see what happens. Like if vibro swords are hitting fours, then it's like okay, the damage plan is going to be much better than everything else. The big part is trying to abuse these, I think, and then I just needed the one extra redeploy because we don't have a one cost redeploy. without an Ewok. But that's all I got for now, and I'll see what's going on. This probably didn't explain much from an upgrade sequencing deck, but like as you can see, trying to push any of these, I need a lot of money in order to play multiple dice. So if you're short on dice, 1 second, go back and check what he had for. He had the Satine version with what Elite R2. Yeah, money's gonna be tight over there, because it was essentially this. 1 second. Oh, that didn't work out with Satine's dice. So it pretty much from this perspective, Satine's gonna roll out, likely find resource on one side. Maybe you re-roll this again. So if this gets mitigated, you kind of have to R2 now because you can't YOLO 3PO with a 1 and 3. So then once you've done that, your fucking upgrades are trash. So you'd have to play 1-drops pretty much right away to get away with stuff like that. If you're doing a Satine build like this, you really want to probably have Han Solo's die, potentially as a 2 of, so that you can just jam it onto Satine and then do that stuff, or jam it onto R2 and then do it. And then this way you have a better shot of hitting the ramp. Because then if you hit the ramp, then you could have like a Vibrosword here. But Satine's actually really bad at keeping her die sides. Because like if you're broke, then trying to roll her in second is brutal. Or just rolling her in because the 2-for-1's dead. Grease has that same exact issue. And that's why like you kind of want to do Grease first, or just make sure you're never broke like that. But if you have Elite 3PO, then like it ends up being okay. But I'll adjust and kind of see what's going on. Grappling arms, though, may make their way back if I can make that stuff all function and work together. Upgrade-wise is always tough, and then having enough removal, and then like being fast enough to potentially use Flee or not use Flee or whatever. But we'll see. The interesting thing about the list, though, is that because of the built-in focus, if we can force our opponent to essentially play mitigation, we can be ahead, like enough for Flee. Like let's say we go first, right? And we're gonna treat this as a grappling arm, and we like roll in like this. If we have a Vibrosword over here, so this is supposed to be 1 die Grease. Where are my Vibroswords at? So this is a grappling, and we're like, okay, 2, 1, 2, and we flip this to the 2. There's pretty good odds. These are all melee. There's pretty good odds are gonna mitigate 1. So then we can come in with Grease, hit like that, and then just go to the 2 again. If we have the money, we can keep that there, and that's like 2, 4. This would be 4 over here, so that's 8, and just do that. So then if the opponent mitigates again, like they're gonna mitigate this one, we could either jam in the 4 damage or try to take the money. If we jam in the 4, it's like, okay, 4. And then if they do anything insane, we can just flee the scene out. But if not, we can just slow roll this. All right, get some more money, and then like flee out. But the problem there is with that sequencing, you'll notice I didn't play like an upgrade or a die. And like that's where the trouble comes in, is because there's so many 1-cost ones that there's like massive concerns about that. But if we have a bunch of 1-cost upgrades, then round 1 we can set up, and round 2 is where things get a little dicey. Because like versus pure aggro, you just kind of know you have to have removal. Versus Jin, they lock up parts of your hand. So like each of these situations are largely problematic. The more 3s you have, Grease could miss, and then it's real bad. So we'll see what ends up happening with the stuff. I'll get that stuff going, but it's always interesting to see that like other decks are running around, and then like if I sit there and play Droids long enough, like somebody will pick it up, and then it'll be like, fucking Droids is broken, and it's like, look guys, like I'm like the only one really playing this, and then or building it, and then other people just go and copy and then play it, and it's great, right? But that's only once we find out what the version is. So like there's the salvage arm and grappling arm theories for like pure value, and it's gonna be like how long guys stay alive. Without redeploys, it's really hard to use a lot of those 1-cost value cards and then lose them shortly after. Like they'll have quote unquote paid for themselves, but not the way that we need them to. And it's also a bit harder on me because I'm used to like pure value entourage, like entourage and to create or pad maze and do all that shit. So we'll see what happens, but Like if I was going as a teen version, I'm pretty sure I'd be running Padme. So if I go Rescue Han, it would obviously be Satine, and there'd be ways to kind of work with that because you can operate a lot of that stuff quite cheap. But we'll see what it is. I'll update Rescue Han, and we'll kind of go from there. And let me know your guys' thoughts. And deuces.